The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello all, thank you for joining us. We're going to get going in just 60 seconds time, so thank you for your patience. Okay, hello everyone. Thanks very much for joining our exclusive Forces and Sophos webinar, which focuses on Sophos Endpoint Exploit Protection. You're going to see a brand new product today that will answer many questions you have about protecting your organization from ransomware. As Sophos customers, I'm sure you've heard of Intercept X, but there are many amongst us who are simply not ready to look at moving endpoint security to the cloud just yet. EXP answers that. You can now run CryptoGuard technology on-premise to spot and block today's most prevalent threat, which of course is ransomware. So before we get started, a few words of introduction. My name is Andy Wall. I'm a director here at Forces and I head up marketing. We've been in business for about 22, 23 years now and focus purely on IT security. We're a major partner of Sophos and have been their UK Partner of the Year 12 times. As many of you know, we build our business on long-term relationships with over half of our 1,000 plus customers having been with us for 5 years or more. We have some world-class engineers here and provide a full range of consultancy, services and support for every stage of your IT security project. And I truly believe that there isn't anyone better in the market to take care of your Sophos project. So today I'm joined by Matt Cook, who is a Senior Product Marketing Manager for Sophos EXP. Matt will be the main presenter and will answer any questions you may have at the end of the webinar, in addition to myself if I can add value and jump in wherever needed. Before I pass over to Matt, I just wanted to go through a few housekeeping points. This webinar will be recorded and uploaded to our YouTube channel straight after this. Our YouTube channel is youtube.com/forces. Whilst you're there, make sure you subscribe to our channel as well. You're going to be on listen-only mode for the duration of the webinar, but please ask any questions throughout. There's a Q&A option via your webinar panel, which Matt will get to at the end of the session. This webinar is going to last no longer than sort of 30 to 40 minutes, and that's hopefully going to include your questions. But of course, if there's more questions than anticipated, we may run over just slightly. Okay, so that's it from me. Let's get on with the show. Matt, are you there?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, thanks very much, Andy.
Thanks very much. Over to you.
Right. Okay. Right, afternoon everyone. Yeah, as Andy said, if you've got questions at the top of your mind right now, stick them in the chat box or the Q&A panel on GoToWebinar. Even if you think we're going to cover it, stick it in there anyway. And no question's a silly question. We'll get to that at the end. So I guess a bit of prerequisite then before we start. So what we're expecting here is that you're probably coming into this webinar, you're hopefully already a user of Sophos Endpoint Protection, and you probably use Sophos Endpoint Protection managed by our on-premises there's a missing S on that slide, our on-premises server, which is Sophos Enterprise Console. And you probably have heard a little bit about Intercept X and some of the great new protection capabilities, but we're thinking, well, I'm not ready to move to cloud-based management yet for my endpoints. I want to stick with using Sophos Enterprise Console. How can I take advantage of some of the great features that you have in Intercept X? And that's what today is all about. As Andy mentioned, we're going to talk about endpoint protection, specifically the exploit prevention add-on that we have available now for our on-premise customers, on-premises managed customers for endpoint protection. So we'll run through exactly what that is in a little bit of detail, and then right at the end we'll just touch on one or two of the differences. If you have experienced Intercept X already, there's a couple of the differences between the two products that we'll make reference to right at the end. Okay, so Endpoint Exploit Prevention. So this is an add-on, right? So you've already got either Endpoint Protection Standard or Advanced right now. It's managed by Enterprise Console. This is an additional add-on or a license that you can purchase to add on, and it will add specific functionality to Enterprise Console and deploy that automatically to your agents as well. And that functionality covers or addresses the real hot topics that people have right now. It addresses the problem with ransomware, specifically using our CryptoGuard technology, which is like your last chance saloon with protection against ransomware, if you like, that sits really down close to the hard disk looking for the behavior of crypto ransomware. We'll talk about that in detail, exactly how that works in just a few minutes. But you know, ransomware, CryptoGuard technology, anti-ransomware is built into Endpoint Exploit Prevention, as is the anti-exploit technology. And the anti-exploit technology is really focused on addressing the problem of software vulnerabilities. It helps close that window of opportunity that attackers have got when they're looking to exploit the software vulnerabilities, either known vulnerabilities through patches perhaps that we haven't got around to deploying yet, or updates that we haven't pushed out, or even the unknown, potential unknown vulnerabilities, the known unknowns, the stuff that we don't know about yet. And it uses exploit technique mitigation. It's designed to protect the vulnerable applications that you've got on your machine. Again, we'll look at that in a little bit more detail as we go through. And then the third component of Endpoint Exploit Prevention is remediation. It's the Sophos Clean technology. So for those of you who are familiar with our remediation product, Sophos Clean, that's included as part of this Endpoint Exploit Prevention add-on license and will automatically get deployed to your agents. This is deep system clean. So this is going off and looking for all traces of malware that might be on your system. So whereas historically antivirus, anti-malware, endpoint protection products have been really good at identifying malware, putting it in quarantine and getting rid of it, what they haven't traditionally done is gone off and found out what the malware did. What did it touch on the machine? What did it change? What settings did it change? What files did it touch or create? And that's what Sophos Clean is really designed to do, is to do a deep system clean to remove all those traces. And that programming gets auto-deployed for you to allow you to run that on your endpoints as well if you need to do so. Again, we're going to look at each one of these in a little bit more detail. Let's start in the middle with vulnerabilities to exploit, the anti-exploit technology that we have within Endpoint Exploit Prevention. If we look at malware and ransomware, well, ransomware is another flame of malware, right? So let's kind of just put it all in one bucket and refer to it as malware. How does it get in right now? Well, particularly with ransomware, at the moment the most prolific, easy for me to say, method that malware is getting through into the organization is coming through with on email as attachments or links to get people to download or open malicious content. But we also see it coming in on exploit kits. And interestingly, this is an article that Microsoft put out on their blog just recently that looked at the usage of exploit kits and how they're being used out in the wild, all the different kits. And what we've seen is towards the back end of last year, there was a little bit of a lull with one or two exploit kits thanks to some good takedowns that took place. But what they noticed in their research was that actually they saw ransomware being deployed through these exploit kits. And by an exploit kit, what we mean is essentially I could be browsing to a good website, right? My favorite news site or whatever it happens to be. And unfortunately, one component of that website, whether it be an iframe or an advertising component or whatever it happens to be, could have been hijacked by an attacker, and an exploit kit could have been planted in there. And that exploit kit is effectively going to be testing my web browser and saying, is your browser up to date with all the patches? Are you vulnerable to this exploit? No? Okay. What about this one? What about this one? Are you running the flash that's vulnerable to this one? And it's looking essentially to try and find that vulnerability on my endpoint. And if it finds it, it's going to exploit it, and it's going to deliver its malicious payload down to me. And that could be ransomware, it could be any flavor of malware. So that's essentially the routine, if you like. And unfortunately, as a user, I may not know anything at all about this. That just happens in the background. And I haven't done anything wrong. I've just gone to my favorite news website to look at the news, right? So it's a real big problem, and defending that is an issue. And if we look at the exploits being used by those exploit kits, again, some more information from the same article that's listed at the bottom there. What you can see is the date that an particular exploit or a vulnerability was patched, and when that exploit was first seen being used in the wild. And in the case of this top example here, well, the patch was available on November the 11th, and it was first seen in the wild on November the 19th, which is kind of okay, right? But in fact, if we go and look at the middle example, one that's perhaps a bit more up to date here, you can see on the patch was available on May the 10th, 2016, and it was first seen in the wild on July the 14th. Now that's kind of okay, as long as you deployed the patches and the updates on May the 10th or May the 11th, or hopefully sometime between May the 10th and July the 14th. But in reality, we know that people don't do that. We know that often people have got huge stacks of updates waiting to deploy to their remote users or local users. Quite often we see rigorous testing processes built into organizations before patches are deployed, so that IT teams get their hands on them, they test them before they then roll them out to the users. And unfortunately, that means that there's often a big window between when the patch is first available and when it actually gets deployed, and that is the window of opportunity that the attackers have. So the longer your process is to deploy the patch, the greater the opportunity, or the greater the risk you're exposing your end users workstations to, and your organization to, therefore. And of course, there are some scenarios, as you can see in the case of the Adobe Flash vulnerability listed there, one up from the bottom, that actually the exploit was first used before the patch was available, and so we had a 0-day scenario in those cases. Now, there's not a lot that we can do about that, unfortunately. As long as we're rigorous on the patch, then by patching on April the 7th, then at least we've limited our exposure to vulnerability there at that point. But as you will see, Endpoint Exploit Prevention is going to help us protect us against all of those scenarios. So our anti-exploit technology comes from Intercept X. If you're familiar with Intercept X, this is the same technology that's in there. And when we look at all the vulnerabilities that exist, of course, people develop software, software has vulnerabilities, requires updates. Now, if we looked across all of the software available to us, whether it's desktop operating systems, whether it's Flash, whether it's PDFs, whether it's Office applications, in fact, any applications out there, there are thousands of vulnerabilities reported every year in all the various vulnerability databases. That number is in its thousands. And when we look at the exploits, we look at the actual attacks being used to exploit those vulnerabilities, well, they're probably down in their hundreds every year. That's roughly what we see there, hundreds of different attacks taking place against those vulnerabilities. But now what we've done with Intercept X, and specifically Endpoint Exploit Prevention, we've gone through and looked at what the attackers are doing during those exploit attacks. And we've identified the techniques that are common across those attacks. So by identifying the techniques, which number down in their tens, if those techniques are consistent and are used across the hundreds of attacks which attack the thousands of vulnerabilities, just by looking for those handful of techniques, we can protect a lot of those software vulnerabilities, those in the thousands that attackers are potentially looking to exploit. So exploit technique mitigation is an effective method of protection against exploit kits and attacks that you often see, again, particularly against browsers and Office applications and also other applications that you may have running. Now, when we look at any one exploit-based attack, we generally see that an attack consists of probably multiple techniques. In the case of this one, for example, you can see you've got various different stages of an attack, and an attacker is using different techniques at each one of those stages. So by looking for all these individual techniques, we're actually able to then intercept the attack before the malicious payload is then dropped down onto the machine, which in this example is ransomware. Now, interestingly, this type of attack, quite often, these are happen in memory, right? So this doesn't necessarily deploy an executable down on a machine and then run an executable. And that's unfortunately one of the reasons why traditional endpoint protection products and antivirus products can often prove to be ineffective in this scenario, because they're designed to look at files on your hard disk. And if they find something malicious in a file on your hard disk, either through a signature or perhaps even a behavior that it might exhibit, and through its machine learning it can work out, yes, this is potentially a bad file, I need to quarantine or remove it. But in this case, it doesn't help us because the attack is all taking place through memory. And so this is why Endpoint Exploit Prevention, or our anti-exploit technology, is particularly effective, because we'll intercept the techniques the attackers use before any malicious activity actually takes place, when it's going through memory and bypassing the files, bypassing the disk, and therefore bypassing your traditional antivirus. So that's the anti-exploit technology, as we've said. Now, one thing actually I should mention on the back on anti-exploit is this is entirely signatureless. So what this isn't doing is adding a whole bunch more signatures to your existing endpoint agent. This isn't adding another component that needs to be regularly updated and deployed, have updates deployed to your endpoint agent, because we're only looking for a handful of attack techniques. You know, as we've said, that number in their tens, in fact, kind of in their 20s, with the techniques that we're looking at. What we tend to see is those number of techniques only increases by a couple every year. And so therefore the requirement to constantly update this module is very, very low. Because it's only looking for a handful of techniques, the system resources required in order to protect the system are also incredibly low. So this is very lightweight, very signatureless technology that's being deployed for anti-exploit. Okay, let's look at ransomware now. So ransomware, we talked about having anti-ransomware capabilities in Endpoint Exploit Prevention. Specifically, we've added our CryptoGuard technology, and our CryptoGuard is really designed to act as your kind of last chance saloon, as I said, against ransomware. So you may get, let's say an email gets through your defenses. You've got through your email security system, there's a Word document attachment in there that's got macros in it, and despite your best efforts of disabling macros, somehow this user's enabled them. They've hit that big yellow button on the top of the screen that came up, they followed the instructions, and a malicious payload is then running on your system. At that point, you're getting hit by ransomware. And the ransomware, well, essentially what it's doing is it's sat there and it's looking for files. It'll open a file, it'll encrypt it, and it'll write the file back again. And what CryptoGuard is doing is it sits there and says, right, when you open a file, I'm just going to take a copy of that before you do anything with it, and then when you write it back again, well, that's fine, you carry on. And then you might do that 2 or 3 times, but if I see you writing that back and it seems to have changed every time, well, at that point, CryptoGuard is going to pop up and say, hang on a minute, you can't do that, I'm not expecting that, looks like malicious activity. I'll then isolate the process, remove its file access. Immediately then, because I've kept this rolling cache of the last few files that you've opened, I can just automatically restore your original files. So this is really designed specifically to focus looking for that malicious process that's encrypting the files on your machine, and in fact it could also be encrypting files across your network as well. Because what we also see now is ransomware where perhaps your machine gets infected, but instead of the ransomware going after the files locally on your machine, the first thing it's going to do is try and access your file shares. Those map drives that you've still got, or SMB file shares that you have, it's going to try and go for those, because to the attacker, probably the data that sits on your server has a higher value, and therefore you're more likely to pay the ransom. So that's kind of what they're going after first in some cases that we see. So you know, it's important to note that CryptoGuard will also defend against those as well. It will defend against your machine attacking those or encrypting those files that sit out on those file shares as well. So you need to have the CryptoGuard or exploit prevention running on your endpoint in order to prevent that activity from happening. So CryptoGuard, it's all about monitoring file access. We see the attack, we roll back the malicious files, and then with our Intercept X product, actually, we can give you some really granular detail of exactly what went on. That's one of the differences actually between Endpoint Exploit Prevention and Intercept X, where we can give you a root cause analysis, and we'll talk about that at the end. I'll show you exactly what that looks like if you want to migrate to our cloud platform in order to get those attack visualizations. But with Endpoint Exploit Prevention managed by Enterprise Console, you'll also get the admin alerts, you'll get the pop-ups in there to tell you exactly what went on. You'll see the crypto ransomware attacks taking place, and I'll show you what that looks like in just 1 second. Now, I also mentioned remediation and Sophos Clean. So as part of Endpoint Exploit Prevention, we'll deploy Sophos Clean to your agents as well, so that you can invoke that if required. Now, of course, your Endpoint Protection already has its own quarantine and cleanup capabilities built in there, but we've built Sophos Clean as well to look a little bit more deeper. Sophos Clean will go through your entire system, and it will scan for things like tracing cookies, for example. It will look for files that perhaps have a particularly poor reputation or are unexpected or in an unexpected place or incorrectly signed, or maybe replaced of a system file with a version of a checksum that we don't recognize, for example. Maybe you've got some registry settings that have been left in there as well, because quite often what you can see is if you get malware on the machine, if it's run, it might leave some stuff behind. It might leave registry settings, it might leave files behind, and it might just be leaving them dormant for a future attack. And in fact, they might have even just been dropped there as a first stage in an attack as well. So identifying those processes, identifying whether they're a running process or whether a file or a registry setting is pretty important when we're looking for remediation, and also threat hunting as well. So Sophos Clean is deployed to the remote agents. It gives you the ability to identify and remove any threats that are found on the machine itself. It will also find any rootkits as well, but bear in mind, if a rootkit is found, you probably need a machine reboot in order to pick that up. And it's invoked through the command line. So if you've got system automation tools, for example, you can deploy a automatic scan if you wish to do so under certain scenarios. Maybe you found malware, maybe you had ransomware on the machine, you can kick off a scan on those machines using system automation tools, or you can do it through the desktop itself or through the command line as well. So that's Sophos Clean that gets deployed as part of the license as well. So let's have a little look, see what it looks like in action. Okay, so first thing to note, you're already running Enterprise Console. The first thing you need to do is upgrade to 5.5. 5.5 is available now. You can pull that down from the Sophos download site that you'll have access to. So you upgrade your Enterprise Console. By purchasing the license, what you'll then find is you have some new policy options. And these policy options, this is where you can see here our CryptoGuard settings and our anti-exploit settings available here to you. You can create your policy, and then once you've created your policy, you can then reprotect your endpoints. And by reprotecting your endpoints, it will then push the relevant components out to those endpoints and protect them for you. So that's kind of the process that you'll go through in order to activate this. And then, of course, once you've done that, we could be in a scenario where, well, let's kind of walk through the user experience here. User gets an email. Email's got a Word document attachment. User opens Word document attachment, gets that protected view warning, says enable editing. Uh-oh, we got ransomware. Well, what the user then sees is exploit prevention down in the system tray. We've prevented an exploit using CryptoGuard for you. So from a user's perspective, all is good. They got a little pop-up just to let them know that they've done something bad or had some risky behavior. They haven't necessarily done anything bad, because I don't think you can ever blame a user for clicking on something that says click me. Ultimately, we need to educate the people better, and we need to do a better job of stopping that stuff getting through in the first place. But at the end of the day, they've clicked on something. We give them a nice little warning down in the system tray to let them know, and then back on the admin console, back on Enterprise Console, you can then see exactly what's gone on. So suspicious behavior, some ransomware has been found out on the machine itself, so it gives you the detail on that. You can then acknowledge the alert, and if necessary, you can invoke a cleanup from there as well if you need to do so. And again, if you want to use the Sophos Clean technology, you can then deploy the command line using your system automation tools, or instruct the user, or have an admin run the Sophos Clean product and executable on the machine to investigate further as well. Okay, so I talked about Intercept X a couple of times. I just wanted to highlight some of the differences here. between Endpoint Exploit Prevention and Intercept X. So Intercept X is very much managed by Sophos Central. It's not managed by Enterprise Console. That's really the core difference between the two pieces of technology here. The Endpoint Exploit Prevention add-on is for existing Enterprise Console customers. You can add that on and it will give you the technology. When you compare the two products, what's the core difference in functionality? Well, the core difference is what we call root cause analysis. Because Intercept X will also see, users, Intercept X customers will also have the ability to visualize attacks using the root cause analysis tool. Now this isn't something that you're going to find in Enterprise Console. One of the reasons for that is behind this there's a lot of telemetry, and that telemetry needs to be processed at scale, and the only way to do that is up in the cloud. We are processing a lot of telemetry here in order to visualize this attack, and what we can see here is where an attack started. So it might have been in Outlook, for example, which I then opened a Word attachment. That Word attachment perhaps downloaded a particular file and launched it as well. And ultimately it drives us to here's the root of where everything started, and here's all the files that were touched and all the registry keys that were touched and all the processes that were executed in the attack chain as well. So you get a nice visualization of it. That's the core difference between the two. The other main difference to note is that Intercept X doesn't have to have endpoint protection running. Intercept X can run with other vendors' antivirus products in order to give them anti-exploit, or to protect you rather, with anti-exploit and CryptoGuard technology. But of course Endpoint Exploit Prevention is built on Enterprise Console and therefore requires Sophos Endpoint. Okay, so that's kind of all the screenshots that we wanted to run through today, and what I want to do now is just make sure that really we're answering all of the questions that you've got. So now is a good time, if any, to start putting those questions into the chat box. We did also have a couple that came through in advance, so I kind of wanted to just talk through those while you're hopefully popping your questions into the chat. And just a note for Andy, I'm not seeing the Q&A panel at the moment, so I don't. If you can either make me organizer, I should see the Q&A, or you can shout out the questions in just a second. But in the meantime, if I just run through the couple that we've got first of all. So one question we had: how can we test EXP during a pilot to determine whether it works against ransomware? That's kind of a really good. Well, without getting ransomware, I suppose one way is to go off and get ransomware, and that's a pretty dangerous thing to do, but yes, we have had some customers go and do that. Another is that we have also a test tool available where we effectively simulate ransomware for you and show you us protecting against it. But of course the downside there is it's our test tool, so why would you believe me telling you that my test tool is a good indication that my product is brilliant? So that's kind of a bit daft, but it will give you a good example of crypto ransomware running. So the alternatives are, you can set up virtual machines and in a safe environment and potentially look to do that as well if you wanted to do so. But there are also some other ransomware simulators tools available. Just one note of caution with those is that, again, a lot of those are produced either by vendors or sponsored by vendors, and therefore some of them have been designed in such a way to make sure that they don't work like actual ransomware and won't trigger in certain scenarios. So don't necessarily take them as gospel if you're just downloading a simulator and running them. You need to really understand exactly what it's doing and look for the ransomware behavior that it's performing. Okay, so one question about Sophos Clean. We have to run Sophos Clean manually when we're using Endpoint Exploit Prevention, and that's one of the differences with Intercept X. So with Intercept X, we automatically invoke Sophos Clean for you, and it automatically runs when we have any detections. With Endpoint Protection, that is slightly different. It is manual to run that, part of that being that you have the existing cleanup capabilities already within Endpoint Protection, so effectively there's a little bit of overlap in there. So we have you run that manually using system automation tools. There's a couple of reasons for that. Is what we see with Enterprise Console managed customers, that quite often some of these may not necessarily be connected to the internet. Now Sophos Clean does require that internet connection in order to run, and we also do require in some scenarios, if we find something particularly bad, a reboot as well. So it's important to note, if you're running endpoint protection, for example, on a Windows Server 2008 R2 or above, then you might need to reboot as well at that point. So we don't automate that just in case to protect you, but you can easily deploy that through command line scans. Question on why do the consoles look different between EXP and Intercept X? Well, hopefully we've kind of explained some of that, or certainly the reasons for that. So Intercept X is built on our cloud platform. It uses the cloud storage capability, has the ability to scale behind there, so we process a lot of telemetry in order and do some analytics work in order to present the nice visualizations and show you everything that went on. We also then combine telemetry from other products. If you're familiar with our, for example, XG firewalls, our mobile control products, a lot of them, and our encryption, a lot of other telemetry and is brought together, and in fact you can manage multiple products through the one interface in Sophos Central, which manages Intercept X. Enterprise Console doesn't have that ability. Obviously it doesn't have that level of storage as well. You'd need to build out some pretty big servers in order to get that storage and to process that telemetry behind there. So that's the core reason for the differences between the two and not having root cause analysis in Enterprise Console. Are we committed to maintaining both consoles? Yeah, absolutely, with new features and functionality, without question. I mean, this is, certainly you have the option right now to say, I really like the look of that root cause analysis, so I want to migrate to Sophos Central and Intercept X. Absolutely, no problem at all. Our colleagues at Forces can help you do that. We've got a simple tool that you can run that will migrate your endpoints, and they can switch your licenses for you. No issues there at all whatsoever. But equally, we are committed to maintaining our on-premise management platform as well, and continuing the development of that as we go forward, and adding this anti-exploit and anti-ransomware technology into that is a great example of that commitment. Okay, here was a question around kind of 32-bit and 64-bit machines. Our understanding is that EXP won't detect ransomware running on 32 and 64-bit machines. Okay, so this is that's actually incorrect. Right, so EXP, Endpoint Exploit Prevention. So let's cover the operating systems that it works on first of all. It's designed for Windows desktop environments of Windows 7 and above, both 32-bit and 64-bit. And if you're using the Endpoint Protection product with EXP on top of a server, it will run on Windows Server 2008 R2 and above, which of course is 64-bit anyway. Now, the anti-ransomware capabilities will protect both the 32-bit and the 64-bit versions, regardless of whether the attack is coming in through memory or whether it's not. However, if my endpoint is a 32-bit endpoint, and I'm sharing out lots of files and another machine decides to try and connect to it and encrypt those files, then in that scenario, I think that's the specific scenario that someone's probably mentioned to you that wouldn't necessarily be covered. Now, of course, that's a kind of a weird scenario though, right? I mean, generally you wouldn't share files out regularly from a user's desktop, and ideally you'd lock that down in order to protect against that anyway. And most of the sharing that takes place happens on the servers, and the servers themselves will be locked down with CryptoGuard as well. So you covered in that scenario. So hopefully that answers that question for you. Okay, perfect. And just in the nick of time, the Q&A box has appeared for me. So let me run through some of these other ones here. What's the downside of having it on-premise compared to the cloud? Well, I suppose the one upside of having it up in the cloud, or having the management component up in the cloud, is that you get that root cause analysis capability with Intercept X. The other upsides are that you don't have to run a server to manage your endpoints, which can be pretty handy as well. It's often much more convenient to do the management up in Sophos Central. So, if you like the idea of that, if you've got no reason to, manage your endpoints from an on-premises based server, then definitely look at Intercept X and switching to Central. So question on my slide about how was a scenario patched before it was ever seen? Well, quite often malware researchers, or rather attack researchers and security researchers, find vulnerabilities, report them to organizations, they then patch them before even exploits are seen in the wild, which is a brilliant scenario as long as we're keeping up on top of the patches. I mean, best bit of advice you can give anyone anytime is patch early and patch often. It doesn't matter what security products you use, do that anyway, because exploit prevention is not a solution to patching. You should still absolutely patch, because effectively you're leaving the window open and saying, I'm vulnerable to that, come and test me, and of course then your anti-exploit technology will jump in and say, no, you can't do that. But if you didn't leave that window open and have someone there saying I'm vulnerable in the first place, then that would be a much better scenario. Should it also be deployed to servers? Yeah, so if you're using endpoint that's managed by Enterprise Console, you may already know that your license will cover you for use on servers as well. So when you're in the on-premise world, that license does cover you for use on servers, and as I've mentioned, you can deploy this to servers. However, you should know that on servers you will only get the CryptoGuard technology being deployed. You won't have anti-exploit running on the server, and kind of in theory the server should be locked down so that it's not running other applications anyway. It's effectively serving out content, so in which case CryptoGuard is the natural feature that you need running on your servers. Now it's worth noting though, if you do switch to Sophos Central, then the servers are within a different license. We have a server protection product with some additional features specifically designed for servers that we recommend you look at. Did I say Intercept X can be used with other vendor products? Yeah, I did. Yes, so that's a really good point. So the anti-exploit, the CryptoGuard, and the root cause analysis, you can get that running with, you can run this on top of another vendor's antivirus if necessary, right? If you don't use Sophos Endpoint Protection, you can still buy Intercept X and layer it on top, because there's every chance that your existing AV doesn't have anti-exploit, anti-ransomware, and root cause analysis, and so this signatureless, lightweight agent is going to give you that on top. And so we designed Intercept X specifically in such a way to be able to do that. Okay, question around impact, performance impact of EXP versus Intercept X. I mean, pretty comparable. Ultimately, it's the similar technology that's being used in the both. EXP doesn't kick off some of the root cause analysis stuff, because obviously that telemetry is being sent up to the cloud and there's no reason to do that. But generally that's only invoked when you've got an attack anyway. So normal running process resource utilization is pretty comparable between the two. The addition that you get on top of your endpoint protection with EXP is pretty negligible anyway. Again, it's all signatureless based technology, and it's it's lightweight, so it's not designed to increase our system resources. Okay, has it been tested in a non-persistent virtual desktop environment? No, it hasn't actually, so that's a really good question. So strongly recommend that you look at our Sophos for virtual environments products for specifically for non-persistent virtual desktop environments. If your virtual desktop environment is serving up a desktop operating system, i.e. not a Windows Server instance to that user, then you might find this particularly effective using EXP. But if it is, then yeah, strongly recommend that you look at our specific virtual environment products for that. CryptoGuard. Oh, question on resources of CryptoGuard. So when I was explaining CryptoGuard, I talked about the way that CryptoGuard caches the last few files that you've accessed, and then can restore back the original files if they happen to get encrypted by ransomware. So it's just a question on the resources for that. So yeah, a couple of things to note. So first of all, this process or this action that we're performing doesn't use the Windows volume shadow copy, because what we actually see is a lot of ransomware now is savvy to volume shadow copy and will automatically shut it down. So if you're reliant on shadow copy, you're in a little bit of trouble against ransomware. So this is a small proprietary cache, but what we've done is tuned it in such a way that effectively we detect the ransomware activity after sort of 3 or 4 files are encrypted, and therefore we keep the cache down to kind of 3 or 4 typical files. So it's a pretty small cache that's kind of running on the machine. So therefore the impact of resources is again pretty negligible. Encourage you to have a play with it, and I think you'll agree that that be the case. Okay, so does EXP only work when you open the attachment? Okay, so EXP is running on the endpoint itself. So if you get an email that comes in with an attachment, and the attachment then attempts to execute the malicious code, for example, EXP will kick in at that point. If you're browsing to a website and the website attempts to look for a vulnerability and exploit that, again, EXP will kick in at that point. So this isn't sat in your mail queue necessarily, it's running and processing on the endpoint. Okay. Any other differences between the Sophos Central managed version of Endpoint Protection and on-premise managed endpoint? Yeah, so probably there was one, and there was this question specifically around firewall. Yeah, your on-premise managed endpoint at the moment comes with an embedded firewall that you can use and firewall policies that you configure from Enterprise Console. Right now, you won't find those in the Sophos Central managed endpoint. However, what we tend to see now is a lot of customers switching more towards Windows Firewall. And so what we're going to be doing is introducing Windows Firewall control into the Sophos Central Managed Endpoint product so that you can configure those. And you expect that to see those appearing soon. If you're in any kind of doubts, I'd definitely recommend setting up a trial of Central Managed Endpoint, having a play with that. I think you'll find the features and functionality pretty comparable now. Okay, we're probably just about up on time.
Yeah, I think so, Matt. I think our 40 minutes is up. There's quite a few questions piling in. I've tried to answer some licensing commercial ones with public view. But what I think we'll do is I'll pass these on to our account managers. If you ask a question that we haven't got around to answering, we'll get in contact with you within about 24 hours and give you the answer there. I'll also work on perhaps producing an A4 document with all of these questions with answers as well that I can send around to everyone that's attended. But other than that, I think that's perfect. If you, as Matt mentioned, if you would like a trial or any more questions regarding the solution, please do get in contact with Forces. You can either just reply to the webinar information that was sent to you, or if you've got your account manager's details, then by all means do get in touch. But thank you ever so much for joining us. We really appreciate it, and yeah, goodbye for now.